Welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast. I'm your host, Pastor Plek, and I'm so glad all of you are joining us as we're recording live from Austin, Texas. And with me in the studio today is none other than Danny Box from the Association of Hill Country Churches. And Danny, what exactly is it you do at the Association of Hill Country Churches?
Well, Chris, basically they put me in charge of just trying to pastor you, try to keep you in line. It's a full-time job.
It is a full-time job.
They needed somebody dedicated to do that. Actually, my title is Director of Coaching, and by that, what we mean is to work with all the churches in our association, provide care for these lead pastors, and then coaching on how to develop a disciple-making culture in their church, as well as helping them develop a church planting culture in the church for the sake of every man, woman, child. Chris.
That's awesome. And so tell me, because you didn't just step into the Association of Hill Country Church. You actually did something before that. You planted a couple churches yourself.
Yeah, so I planted Parkway Bible Church. Back then, formerly, it was Hill Country Bible Church, Pflugerville. Mm-hmm. We planted January of 2000, Chris, which was Y2K. Some of you may remember the world was coming to an end.
Yeah.
We thought a good time to plant a church, so we started back then, planted 2000, and I transitioned out of that role about a year ago, September of 22, that is. And during that time when I was lead pastor, we planted 6 churches. So
wow,
we are in partnership and love the partnership of the association, where churches are voluntarily committed to a mission of getting the gospel to every man, woman, child. And church planting is a key part, really the main part of our strategy.
All right. Well, I also have in studio with us a couple future church planters.
All right. I love future church
so
planters.
Jacob Laldin, who's on staff as our pastoral intern. Welcome, Jacob.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
Yeah, and then also Machine Gun Nick, who might be a couple years out from church planting, but we're really excited because he just got saved, but has a calling on his life to plant some churches.
How y'all doing this morning?
I have a question for you, Danny, real quick. So you said that over those 22 years, you planted 6 churches.
Yeah.
Now, it's my understanding, man, not a lot of church plants make it. How many of those 6 made it?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. One of them was Wells Branch Community Church, and we had real
Let's
questions,
go.
especially when Plek and Paul
Yeah, once Chris stepped in,
role,
it was iffy.
everything was in
I love
jeopardy
that.
at that point.
Yeah, that's right.
No, we planted a Spanish-speaking church, and it did well. In fact, Wells Branch helped in that and provided facility for them. But
Okay.
we kind of launched a group. Actually found a group of Spanish-speaking believers wanting to reproduce, and we took them in and developed them, trained them, and they did well for about, Chris, 3 or 4 years. I don't remember exactly, but John David went on to a different position, and that group folded in with a different church. So that church it doesn't exist anymore. And then we launched, or we're in process of trying to launch a church called Northgate.
Right.
And it never really got any traction, and it didn't
kind of
happen.
folded before it. It did start.
Well, they kind of moved on their own timetable,
Right.
and they were kind of moving in a different direction, but it didn't really ever take. So
Right.
sometimes that happens, and it's part of the process of people trying to step out and do risky things for the sake of the kingdom.
Right.
Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, but,
That is hard. And then Midtown. Did you already talk about them?
Yeah, I didn't talk about Midtown. Yeah, the first church we planted was Hutto, I think, and Hutto Bible Church, and then City View.
Right.
We did those in the same year.
Yeah, talk
then.
about how challenging that was to plant 2 churches, and there was HIVE model. So, and explain what a HIVE model is.
Yeah, HIVE model is where you want to send off enough people where they have critical mass, and there's not a lot like fear about are we going to make it or not. It's there are people who maybe all live in that geographic area that you've targeted.
Okay.
But you really try to recruit quite a bit. So when we launched those 2 churches in 2007, and we sent over 100 people to each one of those churches.
Wow.
And in the scope, and that was a challenge. I remember.
Yeah, seems like it was.
I remember
worth it.
getting all of our remaining leaders in our room, our leadership community, and we talked about writing the next chapter together. And we said, hey, it's like you're in the locker room, and all the graduating seniors have left, and now it's like, what's the team going to be like?
Right.
Or, it's sitting around the dinner table. You sent off your first off to college, or maybe they've married off, and there's this new reality of people being gone. But so it was a big challenge. And I'll add one more thing to that, is that it really exposed too that we needed to do much more work in the area of disciple making.
Right.
Because we sent off so many leaders, and they tend to be your most committed people.
Mm-hmm.
Your most committed servers, servants, most missionally minded, most faithful givers. You send them out the door, and if you haven't been developing new disciples and really working the leadership pipeline, then all of a sudden you find not only empty chairs, but just a vacuum of leadership. So we had to make up a lot of ground before we planted again.
Well, shoot, you did that in 2007, and then you planted Wells Branch in 2009. So it's not like you spent a lot of time.
Well, the goal,
Yeah, seriously, and like all 3 of those churches are like thriving and doing great.
They're
like,
doing really well.
Man,
and,
that's
so
a miracle.
Wells Branch was our first time to plant more
missional
of a
style?
missional mind.
Now, what does that look like? In comparison to the HIVE model.
We probably, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's probably around 30, give or take.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
So just
people,
like a 30 super
as opposed to
committed
sending
people.
out 100 people.
It's a big difference, and what's hard about that is what I've noticed over the years is that those people, they take so much what's the right word for that? Burden. They take a lot of burden that they usually don't last. Now, I don't know if that's true of HIVE model, but what happens, I've seen a lot of just in all like the charter, I go look at all the charter things like, oh, those people aren't here anymore, of like even at East Side, the original 30 that we planted them with, they're gone. And I think that there's a lot of gets chewed up in that initial couple years because it's so hard in the missional model to kind of make it. And so it's those people, I always kind of, it's like almost you like those people lay down and they give their all, and then they're spent, and they're like, okay, after 2 or 3 years of that, I need to go back and get refreshed or whatever at a larger church where I'm not carrying so much of the burden, because you kind of get fried on that. And I think that's one of the challenges that I've kind of shared with church plants is like, really, if you're in the church plant, you've got to have a relationship with Jesus, or you'll get resentful of the church plant because you don't have enough bandwidth to really keep pressing forward. And I think that's one of the things that really one of the things you're coaching pastors to help keep those initial church plants healthy.
Yes, and to add to your point, I really agree. By far, the most important thing is staying connected to Jesus, remaining in Him. And then the second is really keeping your eye on the vision of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And as many have said, vision leaks. And when you kind of forget why, like what was it that gave you the passion to go and plant, and you lose touch with that, then it's just trying to maintain something, and trying to get it off the ground.
Kind of keep the program going.
That's right, and that's not great. That's not good. So
you
really have to do both of those.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the coaching aspect of because I think this thing right here, because we're mainly now, we've sort of moved to the missional model as the primary model. The HIVE model is almost a dated model. I don't. It's not that people aren't doing it. It's just way fewer and far between is the HIVE. So within the missional model, how are you coaching pastors to keep that vision in front of their people so that they don't get fried? Let's just kind of walk that through of what kind of guidance you'd want to give to a church planter.
To a church planter, yeah. So one is that you build culture around vocabulary, and so like what you talk about and how you talk about it, and so phrases like, hey, let's all remember like why we did this.
Yeah.
When you think about every man, woman, and child in the Austin area, and you're talking about our city. And God's heart for the city. And so you do that, and you're using language that others can pick up on and repeat. All that's important with culture.
Yeah.
And then what you celebrate, that's also a big part of culture. So people learn, okay, like what's a big deal? A big deal is like we had someone who invited neighbors over to their house, and they had a chance to share their story. And like, man, we hear stuff like that, we're going to get really excited about it.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to be jazzed about. So what you celebrate, what you calendar for, and what you budget for. And so your budget and your calendar will always demonstrate like what's
Important,
what you're giving time and attention and money to. And then by far, for me, the biggest telltale is the elder agenda. And so when an elder board looks back over the last 6 months of their elder agendas, what are we talking about?
Okay.
And so what you want to see on there, ideally, is that these guys are talking about their own missional involvement.
So you're talking about an elder's personal
Yes.
missional involvement.
Personal, because these are the keepers of the flame.
Right.
Yeah.
They're the ones who model. Peter says that elders are to give example. Leaders are to call people to follow them as they follow Christ. So what you want to see on the elder agenda is that they're talking about their own personal ministry of sharing the gospel, and also of who they are discipling. And that's huge.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that.
You've done a good job of that.
Well, I appreciate that, but I do feel like obviously a long way to go. But let's talk about. I love the way you say they're the keepers of the flame, and so the elder agenda. And so there's gonna be some church planners hearing this, and they're gonna be like, "Oh gosh, I'm just trying to keep the whatever going, right?"
Sure.
And I think that what's more important than the program is the personal ministry of each elder. And especially when you're starting out with like maybe 2 elders or 1 elder, and it's like, lead pastor and another guy, that becomes the challenge of like, we got to get Sunday going. We got to keep Sunday going. And I think what happens is maybe guys start services too early when they don't have a culture of discipleship built in. Would you agree to that?
I so agree with that.
And how do you, and I think there's this inertia that happens when you got your core team together. They're like, we got to plant now. We got to plant now. We got to plant now. And maybe you've seen some of that. Talk to me about some of the mistakes that maybe a planter makes in going too soon, as opposed to really developing that culture of discipleship.
Right. So when you're in recruiting mode of your core team, and you're recruiting and you're training them, how to live on mission, how to disciple. So they're really mobilized to gather people and start sharing the gospel. And then once you launch your service, then all of a sudden it's, we got to set up, we got to tear down, we got to run a children's ministry.
Right.
We've got to get the worship team going. We've got to do, and it can be a distraction if you have not yet established these habits of living on mission and discipling. And if people get away from that, because people only have so many ministry hours.
Right.
They have,
Can you let's break it down. Like, how many ministry hours do you think people have in, like, just like throughout the week? Let's take a 7-day week. How many of those hours are they going to dedicate to church?
Well, Chris, you know this. It varies, right?
Okay.
Life stage. Like,
Sure.
how many kids do you have?
Yeah.
Are you married or are you single? And so it's kind of hard to just give across the board.
Fair enough.
But I think that we need to call them to, to sacrificial living. That there is a cause, every man, woman, child, to the glory of God.
Yep.
That there's a cause worth giving your life to. And so it does play against like how much of your discretionary time are you going to give to ministry?
Right.
How much of your discretionary funds are you going to invest in that?
Nice.
And so that's a challenge, and we never want to get to a legalistic point of saying, okay, if you're really committed, you'll do X, Y, Z.
Right.
That's not what we do.
Right.
We call people to say, what is God calling you to do, and to inspire them with courage to obey God's calling.
Yeah.
Even at great.
So I love, and I think what happens, and this is where I think this is what church planners could really learn from, is that a church planner will say, listen, I need you to X, Y, Z, and then the person will do it for the church planner, because the church planner is usually a charismatic person who's really awesome, as opposed to them saying, like, listen, what is God calling you to do? And then you kind of like, if you put that in their hands and they go, I guess God's calling me to set up on Sunday mornings. And so then it doesn't become a personal attack when you don't give them like all the feel goods, because eventually there's going to be more people than you can feel good on a Sunday morning. And then that person's doing it for Jesus and not because the church planner asked me to.
Well, that's an important motive. And then the other piece is that everybody understands the part I'm playing is significant.
Right.
So that, that grandmother who's holding that baby in the nursery, she understands that she prays for that baby's parents.
Yep.
As she prays for that baby's salvation, as she's involved, that it is a very significant part in what God is doing and the mission that God's given to us.
Absolutely. Let's talk to a church planner about communicating that vision, because I think it's one thing to talk about evangelism to adults, but then within each person within your ministry to communicate that vision, kind of like you were saying, praying over a baby. Like that seems sort of like almost a disconnect, I think, for some church planners of not really understanding the great value there.
Yes, it's very important that everybody understands that I'm not just in a supporting role. I'm in a significant role that if I'm not doing what God has called me to do, that the mission is going to suffer.
Right.
Like something is at stake. And, that's a big part of vision, is determining like what must be.
Right.
And so when everybody senses that about their own individual calling in the context of the big calling of the whole church,
Right.
that helps motivate. It helps people to, stay engaged. And then, of course, as Chris said, that's got to be supplemented or really rooted in, remaining in Christ, staying connected to Jesus. But, Chris, I was thinking earlier when we were talking about this, to the church planter, it's true that initially it's all hands on deck.
Right.
And once you do decide to launch into your Sunday morning service, there are a lot of responsibilities. But the leader has got to keep what is the main thing.
Right.
And even if he's just with one other or two other, three other elders, a small elder leadership team, they have got to reserve time in each elder board before just getting to the logistic, tactical issues. They've got to talk about, like, how are you doing with Jesus?
Nice.
How are you doing in your own missional living and disciple making? And they need to realize that their context for disciple making are going to be that initial core team they're responsible for leading ministry teams.
Right.
So one of those elders oversees children, one of those elders oversees students, and they're recruiting people, and they're going to be discipling those people.
Yeah.
And so they, from the very beginning, it's, what we used to call DNA, right? It's from the very beginning. Covey would say, hey, you're always going to work on the urgent things.
Right.
But you've got to have that quadrant of what is important and not urgent. And that's the most important that often gets the most neglect.
Okay, so because I think what happens in elder meetings, just from pure experience of you drift from the important to the urgent, and then all of a sudden you're meeting out logistics of like how the children's ministry is going to run on a Sunday, as opposed to repenting of whatever sin and kind of moving forward and having the gospel ministered right within that context of an elder board, or like, hey, what's your personal ministry like to your neighbors? And then you're just like, we gotta listen. That's important and all, but what are we gonna do for children's ministry this week? And it's coming. It's like, Sunday is always coming, and there's just a drift there. I think that's the hard part.
It really is. And so you build rhythms in your calendar.
Yeah.
You build rhythms in your agenda. And so once a month, the lead pastor and his elder chairman, once a month when they're planning the elder meetings, they're building in, hey, this week we're going to spend 15, 20 minutes
Nice.
for everyone to share, like, how you're doing missionally.
Yep.
And then next month, maybe it's how you're doing in your personal connection with Jesus.
Right.
Later, how you're doing in discipleship. So you build that in there.
Yeah.
It's the old illustration of the balls and the beans. You know.
Yeah. You got to put the big balls in first, and the beans can come in later. Yeah.
Put those things in, and then everything else you pour in there.
Yeah.
And God gives us grace. Sunday's going to happen.
I think that's what's so challenging, just because and this is let's help church planners figure out their time for a second, because I think this is where a lot of church planners spend a lot of time on their sermon and not a lot of time on evangelism. And is there any way you can kind of help us like wrap our head around like what just in the in the core team phase, as you get to this every week Sunday morning, there's a shift, right, from like you're just doing pure evangelism and developing leaders to now you've got to think about the Sunday service, because there is a part of it. But how much time should we be spending on your sermon versus evangelism versus all that other stuff, especially in those early days of a church?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The temptation is to spend an unbalanced amount of time on your message. So
Right.
If you can limit to 12 hours or less.
Right.
And then it's not only the amount of time, but it's where that time goes. And some of that, it's not right or wrong. It's personality and preferences. But I did a lot of my prep early morning.
Yeah.
And I didn't finish up till Sunday morning. So I'm up at, I'm at the office at 4:30.
Right.
And I'm finalizing, for the two services. But so when I think about those 8 hours, and you just take, okay, you're going to put 3 or 4 in on Sunday morning.
Yep.
And the other 8 are going to come on maybe 2 mornings or 2 afternoons, or, if you don't have kids at home, you might put in some time on Saturday.
Yeah.
But you cannot spend 3 full days working on your message.
That's right.
Wow.
And so developing your skills where a lot of the process that we work through with exegesis and then homiletics, a lot of that, the more you go, the more comfortable you get in
Right.
that.
And that's why getting reps in
That's
is
right.
essential, even before you're the lead pastor. Like preaching somewhere in some sort of venue is very helpful to kind of get those rhythms in, so you're not like, because it's almost like having a final exam every Sunday, and so being able to take the amount of time is appropriate, and understand that the Lord's going to give you the words, the Lord's going to do the work, and living in His grace that He's got this. Because I think there's a part of it you can over prepare, and then you almost neglect the more, I don't say more, because preaching the word is obviously super, super important, but there's this whole gambit of ministry that gets undone because you're so focused and it's an imbalance towards the sermon, and that becomes a struggle. So I don't know if necessarily need to give but I say like I said 12 hours max, and then the rest of that time, what are you doing?
Yeah. The rest of the time that you're doing leadership development. That's a huge part of the lead pastor, even the church planter's role.
Yep.
Because when you plant a church, what you're going to find is, man, we need elders.
Yep.
And not only that, but elders rotate off. You get into a rhythm where 2 elders rotate off and 2 more come on. So that keeps a healthy pressure on the lead pastor to be about leadership development. Now, the lead pastor isn't the only one who can be involved in leadership development, but it's the lead pastor's role to make sure it happens.
Right.
Like when I was pastoring at Parkway, I owned that area. There were other men who also were developing leaders, so we're talking about more advanced level of
So talk to me what that means.
Discipleship.
Yeah. So when you say more advanced level, it's like you're meeting with them. You're not just going, here's how you read your Bible. What are you talking about in that maybe more advanced level of discipleship in the leader pipeline type stuff?
Yeah, so the curriculum and stuff you choose may vary,
Right?
But it lends itself to discussions about theology. It lends itself to discussions about disciple making,
Right.
and reproducing disciples. And so when we think about qualifications of an elder, Timothy tells us, 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, they give us the non-negotiables.
Right.
But beyond that, you're really looking for men who have a history of making disciples, living on mission,
Right.
And so those are the things you're trying to train guys on.
Right.
So you're recruiting guys who have some maturity,
Yeah.
both in their knowledge of God's word and in serving. They've demonstrated faithfulness.
Yeah.
They're in love with the cause of going after every man, woman, child.
Right.
But then you're helping them develop the convictions and practices associated with disciple making and living on mission. Those are the big deals. And so the leader has got to be investing a lot of time in men with that in mind.
Yeah.
The other thing that you're doing is you're thinking not only about biblical content from a communication standpoint, but you're thinking about, again, vision and opportunities. Like, what are my opportunities to speak at the level of vision? And so I always loved it when I could meet with all of our children's ministry workers.
Yeah.
And so they would gather once a month, to do their planning and stuff. And if I could get 15 or 20 minutes and talk to them about the vision and the value of what they're doing, man, that's a big win.
Yeah, and I think that's something, like, as I'm here, I'm like convicted, man, I probably need to do that with our children's ministry workers, because that's something that doesn't die off over time, although you might like delegate that to an extent. But man, there is something special when the lead pastor comes in and reinvigorates the flame, no matter what stage of ministry you're at, to your most important leaders, to really say, hey, you are a vital part of the mission. If you don't show up on a Sunday morning, and if you don't provide an incredible quality experience that's attractional, this is kind of the attractional aspect, then we're going to lose people out the back door who've come because you were missional, which is awesome. So I think there's an attractional and the missional aspect that you're trying to weigh in there. So talk to me about the attractional versus missional model, if you will, the difference between them, and then how we kind of want to exhibit both, and how we can do that.
Yeah, so historically, the church kind of followed a really strong attractional model.
Right.
And so it was, okay, how can we get as many people in here as possible? And the things that attract people can be either your personalities up front. It can be the place, like the location where you guys are. Like, people like, man, that's so close to me. I like that, or I like that facility. So personalities, place. The other is your programs. Sometimes, you want programs that are going to attract families with small children, because you've got the best children's ministry.
Yep.
Your programs are the best. Or the other one is just people. Like, I have friends there.
Right.
Like, when I walk in there, like, the personalities, they're okay. But, man, these are my peeps, here. So those are the
This is my ride or die.
things
Yeah.
that can attract people into the thing. And you can add to that with some, marketing and trying to get your name out there. And that is the attractional model. And for many, many years, that's the only play we ran.
Right.
And then we all kind of woke up in the 90s and said, okay, wait a minute, we need to be more missional. It's not about how many we can seat. It's about how many can we send.
And that's where a vision casting piece really comes into play.
Oh, yeah.
Is that how you do you measure success for a planting?
Yeah.
Like, is it the most people I can get in the seats, or is it the next plant that I can make from my church? Like, how are there multiple levels of success on a church plant?
So that's really great question. And leading up to the answer there is the shift in the model.
Yeah.
And so when we kind of were just attractional and we woke up and said, okay, we've got to equip our people to live on mission and send them out. And then with the pendulum swung way over here.
Right.
And we almost were talking exclusively about mission.
Right.
And then now we've kind of realized that
it's a both and. Yep.
It's not either or. We need to both attract, because as people are attracted, from there we disciple them and send them out. And so success, and I think every church ought to have some sense of how do we know we're accomplishing our mission?
Yeah.
And so identifying those are really important. And generally speaking, it's going to be about how many people are sharing the gospel, how many people are really connecting with Jesus in a vital way, how many of your people are trying to make disciples of other people. Like, those are the key things.
Yeah.
Like at Parkway, we ask 4 questions. Are you in the Word? Are you in the family? Are you connecting with other believers? And then third, are you in the trenches, which is kind of the idea that, man, we're locking arms together. We are in community.
Yeah, I
and
love
we're
that.
mobilized for ministry.
Yeah.
And then the last one is, are you in the field? You know, Jesus said the fields are white for harvest. Like, are you in the field? Are you out there sharing the gospel among the people that you live, work, and play?
That's good.
So that's just an example. Every church finds their own way to message
Yep.
that, but that becomes specific things that you can actually ask people.
Yeah.
You
No,
know?
I like the way that's put like that, because I can say, are you in the Word? And if you're a Christian, you've been around a little bit, you know what that means.
Yeah.
Are you in the trenches? That might be, you might take a little bit to explain, but man, once you explain it, like, yeah, when you're locked in a ministry, I think we can say on our Tuesday night experience with Machine Gun Nick, we have a lot of people that are in the trenches doing ministry with them. But then in the family and in the field, I love that. This is such, man, I love those 4 questions. That's awesome.
So the going back to the whole
Missional, attractional, yeah.
and missional, there has been this sense among many churches of what a friend of mine calls the dysfunctional Great Commission, which reads something like this: that go into all the world and make worship attenders, baptizing them into small groups, and teaching them to serve a few hours.
Wow.
Like that's
funny.
kind of the biggest thing that churches are just trying to, and what that is the attractional thing. Like, we're trying to gather people and get them connected. So it doesn't honor the idea of really going out and sending as you go. I think the church is responding to that and growing in that, but a lot of churches are still stuck on just the one side of the funnel.
Yeah. I think it's hard to kind of, again, when you become program focused, it's hard to think about sending out and doing all the things of specifically in your own sphere of influence. And so, as a church planner, you're kind of going, again, you're keeping that vision. We want to be attractional. We want to have a quality experience that fits for the culture, but we want to be missional all the time. And I think what's interesting, I had a friend of mine who said, like, from another country, he goes, all you Americans are so entertainment driven. And I was like, that was a wild observation. It doesn't never been to a church ever, but said just about our cultures were entertainment driven. So I'm not saying that we need to compete with the culture because we have something better, right? But at the same time, that says a lot about the way people think and view the world. And so there has to be an aspect of quality. But then how do you, and I think this is kind of what you're saying, is like, how do you keep mission and attraction at the same time? And I think this goes to measurables. So talk to me about some measurables. And I think traditionally it's, the 3 B's, butts, budgets, and buildings, right? Yeah. So what are the measurables that we're looking at now? And one of the ones I want you to get to is conversion growth rate, which, it's transfer growth versus conversion growth. So that's where I want you to go with that.
Okay. Well, transfer growth happens sometimes, and it's not like you stand at the door and try to screen those guys out some way. But that's not what we're after.
What is transfer growth?
We're
just
never
first off,
content with the idea that Christians are just being reshuffled.
Yeah.
And so they move from one church to another
Right.
because, man, they like your worship service or something.
Yeah.
That's transfer growth. What we were looking for, conversion growth, so new people who are hearing the gospel and responding and connecting to the church.
Right.
So, what I've heard about what you guys are doing on Tuesday evenings, that's really been an opportunity for people to hear the gospel, start connecting, and they may connect at that level for quite a while
Right.
before they ever show up on a Sunday morning, if they do,
Right.
here.
Right.
But that's the idea of sending people, empowering them to do ministry and connecting with people and then discipling them. So conversion growth is what we're after. And when we talk about measurables again,
Yep.
that every ministry has some sense of metrics to measure their win.
Right.
And so, I talked about that briefly for a
Yeah,
moment.
talk about
those
that,
4
because it's not
questions.
just like, because I think sometimes when people hear numbers, they get defeated, like, all the church cares about is numbers.
Right.
But talk about the win aspect.
So, when you look at those 4 questions that we're asking at Parkway, it's not numbers. And we we track that too. We want to know like how many people are coming. We want to know how many people are involved in small groups or life-changing relationships. We want to know how many people. So we're not insensitive to that, but that used to be all that we measure. We used to generate, a quarterly report, and it tracked all that stuff. And it's not like we just threw that away. We still track that. But now when you look at what we're actually measuring, it's what percentage of our people, how many of our people are engaged? Are you in the Word? Are you in the family? Are you in the trenches? Are you in the field?
Yeah, it's nice.
And so that's kind of our win.
Man, I love that. Okay, and so conversion growth rate, because this is one that our elders recently just talked about. What we've defined that as is number of people who got saved and baptized at our church, and then divided by the number of new members added to our flock. And that helps us to see, like, are we really doing what God has called us to do to reduce the lostness, to advance every man, woman, and child in the greater Austin area hearing the gospel from the lips of someone associated with our church. And that's been a unique and a cool way to measure, like, the number of people that joined the church and then the number of people that were actually, they weren't just transferred, they got saved and baptized here. So let's talk about, is there a typical number for that in general out there that we can look at? Like, is there like I don't want to say baseline, but like if you have transfer growth at this much and conversion growth at this much, what's the good balance? Because you're going to have both.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some kind of algorithm out there, but I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But I think that people decide, how they're going to measure that. And the key is just be consistent so that you can track trending.
Yes.
And so you may come up with a formula different from another church, but it doesn't matter. It's just take it and trend it, track it over a period of time. So I think it's popular when you talk about conversion growth to say, okay, the number of people that are that have been saved and baptized, and they're connecting to the church.
Right.
So they can be connecting to a group. So they're connecting somewhere in the orbit of your church.
Right.
That's conversion growth. Now, we celebrate every conversion.
Right.
We celebrate every conversion, but not every convert ends up connecting to your church. So you're trying to measure conversion growth, how many have connected. So the formula, what you guys are doing, Chris, is great.
Yeah.
You just want to track it.
Yeah, I think this was hard because over time, again, I think drift happens, and as a church planner, there's a tendency not to track numbers as much over time because you're just like, who has time for that? But talk about the importance of track, especially for church planners that are like, numbers, schmumbers. Like, we're going to do the ministry. Why is it important? And I think that goes back to the wins aspect. But can you talk about why that's important for a church planner to maintain some metrics and be consistent?
Yeah. When you do keep track of numbers, you've got some sensitivity to that. That helps you in your planning because when you see, all right, hey, we're starting to grow, and we're going to eventually, if we stay on this track, we're going to end up having to make decisions about space.
Right.
Are we going to need to go to a second service?
Right.
What do we need to do? So numbers help you in your planning. They can also be a signal that, okay, like we're not really attracting any visitors.
Right.
We're not, some things aren't happening, which ultimately we know that God's in charge of, but sometimes there's the diligence part of what we do.
Yeah.
And then there's the dependence part of what God does. So we're diligent, but we're dependent. And so when we see, okay, it looks like something's off kilter here, then it becomes a matter of focused prayer. And then there may be some reworking of some strategy. It may be something that we're going to communicate and teach on. So, numbers help you kind of observe.
Yeah.
Like what's going well, what's not going well, what do we need to address? The issue is to not be so obsessed on it that our goal is just generating a better report.
Good.
Because if all you're looking at numbers, you can have a growing church.
Yeah.
That is not sharing the gospel.
More
That's
butts and seats.
They found a good personality that's attracting people, and you get some momentum, and a lot of more people showing up. But your church isn't really making disciples and reproducing missional disciples.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's a seductive thing
Yes.
that you have to be aware of. So yes, pay attention to that and learn from that. But remember, we're after this. How many people are we sending out living on mission? How
Yep.
many churches are we planting
Yep.
for the sake of every man, woman, child?
Yeah.
Chris, can I say something
Yeah,
else? Okay, I just go backwards because again, the heart for those church planters, those Josephs out there who one day are going to plant, those who are in the process, is that as Chris mentioned earlier, I think it's so important that you resist the urge to launch a Sunday service too soon.
Right.
And so I think about a guy in our association.
Yeah.
He's planning a church. He had 4 small groups.
Yep.
It started with 2. They multiplied to 4. So you're already building some reproduction in there.
Yep.
And then they were, the last time I talked with them, just about to reach 6 groups. And so now they've got 6 groups in that area.
Yes.
So there are core teams involved in that. They've multiplied, and they're getting some critical mass.
Yes.
They were establishing some patterns, and then they launch.
Right.
And so
Because then they're going to
that's
launch
the way to do it.
larger, and it's going to feel like not quite as just so
right.
much weight.
That's right.
So let's shift a little bit. Let's talk to. I got some future church planners here, Jacob and Machine Gun Nick. So I want to talk through like if you, what kind of characteristics, what kind of what type of person are you looking for as a sending church? What kind of habits, life patterns are you looking for in a church planner?
Yeah.
And you just stole my first question.
Okay,
moving on.
You're a Texas Longhorn.
Yeah, that's number one.
Okay, that's, there's some things like that. Now, when we think about our church planters, not only our church planters, but even our existing pastors in our, when we think about what's a healthy leader,
Right.
It's a combination of some character traits and some core competencies, some skills.
Okay.
And so, like, for example, among the character traits would be humble dependence.
Right.
Okay, so I lead in a way where I'm dependence on God is huge. So staying connected to Jesus, the big indicator there is your prayer life.
Yeah.
So don't say you're dependent on God if you never pray. You're just trying to get it out. So humble dependence. The next thing is courageous leadership. And so there's times when you've got to have the courage to follow the Spirit's leading. Okay? And so leaders face courage not only personally about sharing the gospel, but also when they have to make decisions that seem risky.
Yep.
Like, do we go to a second service? Is this the time to plant a church? Like, wow, how are people going to give in this campaign in order to build this building? Like, all of that feels really risky, doesn't it, Chris?
Oh gosh.
And so courageous leadership. Another character trait is genuine compassion.
Yeah.
And so like you really have a heart for people, and you have a desire to see them reach. So there's a number of character traits like that we measure. That you are, you're self-aware. You got some sense of who you are, your gifting and your wiring. So anyway, there's some traits like that. And the last one I'll just mention is kind of this idea of complete integrity, comprehensive integrity, that who you are in private matches what you say in public. Like you're walking the talk and talking the walk.
Yeah.
And that's all big. So those are kind of examples of character issues.
Yeah. I do love that. And so let's just talk through like, what are some pitfalls you see, maybe potential planters or like guys in training, like they weren't, because I always look at, starter, sustainer, self-awareness. What self-awareness factors have you seen that someone didn't have that prevented them from going further?
So if somebody is stepping into a role that really falls outside of their wheelhouse, like, when their passions and their gifting and their experience, when those all line up, that's kind of your wheelhouse.
Right.
Because, man, experience a lot of time gives you this drive, like, man, I want this to happen, which generates a passion.
Yep.
And then the gifting that God has given you. So when you're operating and now you're in a role where there's a little, you're doing a little bit out of that wheelhouse, but 80%, 75% of your time is given to administrivia.
Yeah.
It's given to, problem solving and logistics, and you're not surrounding yourself with other gifted people, and you're doing that, that's burnout, man. That's big burnout.
Yeah, so let's talk about what that is. There's something where you are able to draw other competent people as a church planter that are just around you, and you're able to delegate to them tasks that are not in your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And I think what happens for church planters or people that I think the big thing is they either want to do it all themselves, or they're great delegators, but they never check on what they've delegated. Yeah. And I think there's you have to inspect what you expect. I think those are two biggies.
Trust but verify.
Trust but verify.
It's a military term that we would use on that one. You know, when you go and give someone a task, and then you go, like you said, inspect, make sure it happened. You trust but verify. Now, that being said, and we're kind of leading into some of my other questions that I had, before we get there, one of them was know your strengths, right? Mm-hmm. And, I can look at myself, but I can only look at myself so far. I think some people can go deeper and others, not so much. But so who do you kind of pick to trust to be able to help bring out and show you your strengths?
That's good.
Mm-hmm. To discover your own strengths?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's some standard things like some spiritual gifts testing that's helpful, but experience and the input of others that you're in community with is very valuable. Mm-hmm. And so let's say that you think, man, I've got some gifts in teaching. Mm-hmm. And you expose yourself to some training, you get some training. And then you step into a role that hopefully a leader provides a role with a small group or whatever situation, and you're getting feedback on that. Like to me, that's the most helpful way. Testing does give you a sense of, hey, I've got some bent this way, but it's experience and then feedback. So some people they don't want the feedback, and
too bad.
They insist that, man, I can sing on the worship team, and even though everybody is saying no, you can't, and they go, oh yes, I can. So feedback is important. So the leader just has to work with people and give them a chance. One of the things that we do in trying to reproduce churches is to help leaders see themselves not as the hero. Mm-hmm. But as a hero maker.
Right.
Okay.
And so now, I'm actually consciously, when I think about my own personal success, is how many people am I helping to step into their ministry role and enabling them to be successful and effective in reaching the people God has called them to reach. And so I want to help create a kingdom platform for them. What's your ministry area? I want to empower you to succeed here. Mm-hmm. And so in that way, I'm seeing my role not as being the central hero. Okay, everybody's attracted to this church because I'm here.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But I'm here to help make a lot of heroes that are really functioning in their ministry areas inside and outside of the church.
And now once you know your strengths and your weaknesses, right? How do you pick because you're going to have to pick a team that's you're going to have to find somebody whose, strengths and weaknesses are the opposite of yours, kind of, right?
Yeah, right.
To make a great team.
Yeah.
So if I'm weak in one area, I'm looking for somebody who's strong in that area. Maybe I'm great at sermons, but I'm not so great at bringing people in the door because I give off a militaristic personality, right? I mean, it could happen.
Not you, Machine Gun.
No, not Machine Gun Nick. No, but maybe. Just saying. But that's so. How do you go about selecting those people, and how do you measure those people are the right fit for your team?
Well, if you do have a sense of strengths and weaknesses, as you said, then it's a matter of praying that God will bring people that will be the right complement on the leadership team. You pray them in the door, and you trust God to provide those people. And so, you look at the people that God's brought in, and you're interacting with them and developing them, and you just discover what their strengths are. And, you help people do some gift assessment. You're getting to know them. Like, where have you served in the past? Like, tell me about the job that you work. Like, what do you do? What do you feel like you're good at? And this guy says, well, man, I do project management. And, I work to make sure that the project's happening, and I'm overseeing several different teams to make that happen. And you think, man, that person would be invaluable to work alongside of a lead pastor who may not be real organized, be not real administrative. And so the leader does, because he's self-aware, he knows what kind of people they need. He prays for them. He trusts God to provide them, and he just gets to know his people personally and finds out where their strengths and weaknesses are.
And I think the hero maker part of this is really important, Danny. Talk to us about how you're inviting someone to use their strength to uplift the kingdom of God, but it can feel like I'm just trying to get you to do my thing. Right, because it's like I'm planting a church. Help me plant the church. No. We're going to plant this church together, and you are needed to accentuate my weaknesses or whatever, accentuate your strengths, help out in my weaknesses. I feel like that's an important aspect, because I think this is where people can feel used if you don't properly train them in the way to view the relationship, because there is, a lead pastor is leading, but the way that you draw people is probably going to be how you're going to keep people. And let's talk through some of that. Because to Machine Gun Nick's point, like, you're asking someone to give of their time, their treasure, their talent to support something that you're trying to do for the kingdom of God. But if they don't see it properly, they're going to get burnt out, used, and frustrated. So let's walk through that a little bit, because I think that's that self-awareness aspect.
Okay. So, one of the things is the leader has to see a main part of his role as being the feeder and leader of his volunteers. And so it is caring for their soul.
Yep.
So people especially feel used when they feel like you don't really care about me. You only care about what I can do.
Right.
And so the feeding and leading of your volunteers begins first and foremost with you caring for their soul.
Yeah.
And loving them, and then equipping them. And then the second thing is the leader has to have the mindset that when you call people to ministry, to serve and to give their gifts, that you're doing them a favor.
Right. That's the hard part.
Most leaders feel like when they recruit, they're asking them for a favor. Man, will you do me a favor? And you're doing them a favor, because the most important thing we can do next to coming to faith in Christ is get involved in the cause of Christ.
There you go.
Yeah.
And just serve. And I think when we're in heaven, that the first person after Jesus, after greeting our Savior, the first person you want to talk to is who led you to faith.
Yep.
But the next person is the person who got you into ministry.
Right.
Because now you've invested your life in eternal things. They're going to result in eternal reward. That all that happens because somebody invited you into a relationship. So I try to help our leaders develop that mindset that don't be timid like you're asking for a favor. I'm inconveniencing you. I know. No, look, hey, guess what? I want to invite you in to invest your life in eternal things. So I think that mindset is very important.
Huge. I feel like that, because I think people will follow you and naturally ask, if you're a charismatic personality, that will get you so far. But to see that I'm calling you to greatness, and I want to lift you up, and I'm going to support and serve you while you do that great thing. And then the follow-up aspect, I think, is huge. What are the questions you guys got? Is guys that are thinking one day I might plant, what would you ask?
Yeah, I have a great question. So as we're having this,
it's going to be great.
It's going to be great. I've been sitting on it for
it's Jacob approved
a while. As we're talking about a missional versus attractional In your experience at Parkway, like what type of rhythms did you incorporate to constantly be refilling the vision tank, like from your staff to your leaders to your volunteers? Like what did you find most effective, whether it be from stage or one-on-ones, to keep the missional mindset strong, that people aren't just that people aren't just focusing on numbers, but like the Great Commission?
Yeah. So great question. And, over the 22 years, we've kind of rode those trends that I talked about. We started out primarily attractional, woke up to the need for missional, and almost went exclusively to that. And then over the last, 3 or 4 years, we were really trying to work both of those. And so given that history, the things that we were doing always starts with leadership first. So at our elders and even our pastoral level, like we're talking about our vision, we're talking about like what we're trying to do and accomplish, and the highest values of living on mission and multiplying disciples, disciple making. We talked about those once a month. Once a month, all of our elders kind of did a little temperature. We picked up on this with some of the evangelism cohort that our guys are doing. Chris, I know you've done that, but we kind of learned this rhythm of doing a temperature. So once a month, like each of our elders and pastors would take their temperature for mission. And so you would say, man, I was kind of at a 5 this last month. I was praying for people far away from God, but I didn't really take any steps. Or, hey, this last month, we had neighbors over. We had a great time. We were able to express love and care for them. So, you report in, like you're actually talking about, and you have to be intentional. You have to build that into your calendar. That's what I mean by rhythms. So, Jacob, at the top levels, we're talking about that and doing that. And then those leaders would then, in turn, do it with our small group leaders.
Right.
So you can see how this is trickling down.
Yeah.
So small group leaders are doing that with the people in their small group, same kind of conversations, their missional temperature, their multiplication temperature. And then you find times when you're preaching, whenever it lends itself to talk about the vision, that happens. Oftentimes before I went into the message, I would just say, hey guys, before we get started, I just want to celebrate something that happened last week. We were in Taylor, Texas, and we saw the launch of the charter. Like you share that, like you find things like that keep in front of the people that we're involved in something bigger than ourselves, and what others are doing is what we're committed to doing. Yeah. And then finally, I would just say that you have what we called leadership community. It's once a quarter. We would get all of our leaders. If you were responsible for people, right? So you were a ministry leader, your small group leader, elder pastor, whatever. Like anyone that had people that they were responsible for. We invited them to a leadership community, and there we celebrated and we cast a vision, and that was a big time. Yeah. Some of you, you've been in the lazy river, like when you go to these water parks and the lazy river that goes around. Yep. You remember there's one part that is all the water thrust in, and you get all the power, and it kind of carries you around. Yeah. Like we feel like every lap, like every quarter, that people need this infusion. Yeah. So, some people are pretty excitable. Like I wish we could get Chris to get a little bit more excitable. And some leaders are quiet, and it's not about style. Right. But you have got to be able to remind people why what we're doing must happen. Yeah. And so sometimes people can do that in a lot of different ways, but you've got to motivate. Leaders got to motivate. Nick, you asked me, like, what are you looking for in a guy? Well, in addition to character, some of the competencies is we're looking for visionary leaders. Mm-hmm. Leaders who can see, like, what is this desired future? Mm-hmm. And what is worth really this compelling cause that would call people to move and relocate to a different part of the city to reach that area? So a visionary leader, you got to be an effective communicator. That's both teaching and leading and motivating and things like that. So there are some basic skills, and that are part of what we're looking for as well.
Well, man, Danny, I feel like we could talk for like 20 hours.
Can I have one more question?
You have 1 minute, and it better be quick.
It is very quick, and this one's to both Pastor Plek and Danny. If there is one piece of advice that each of you wish you would have had before starting your the lead pastor role, what would it have been?
Start my lead pastor role. I had so much to learn, and I was very grateful for what God had exposed me to already. But I had a lot to learn about leading, and I guess my biggest thing is that you can't be completely prepared before you launch. You'll never launch.
No, I like that. I think that's huge. Man, that's exactly right. Because I think there's some people who want to have everything perfect before they go. You kind of have to be okay with building the airplane while you fly it.
That's right.
I think for me, it would be, man, I didn't realize how sinful I was. And I know that you can never realize that. But I didn't realize the capacity of the darkness of my own heart, and how I really needed, if I could have been hey, you're going to encounter stuff in this first couple years that you need to be prepared that you're not prepared for, kind of what you're saying. But if you don't let your heart be transformed by the gospel, and the gospel still applies to you even more so now.
That's so
and
good.
I think for me, that was probably the biggest thing of oh gosh, I have a lot more to learn in terms of grace. I think I was man, I know the Bible. I am smart at Bible. I can teach people the Bible. And that is important, but I think what's more important is this aspect of having the transformation of my own soul. I don't want to say from glory to copy Paul, but I might. I think that's it, though. It's I want to be open to this fact that I have so much room to grow. All right, hey, we're gonna, man, we just went for an hour. I don't know if you knew that. It was a lot. So I'm excited. We're gonna have Danny back to talk more church planting, because I know we didn't get to half of any of the questions. I have to bring you guys back, and we'll bring a whole more church planting panel up. But hey, listen, I would love for you to share, tell a church planting friend that they need to move to Austin and transform their life into be a church planter here. We would love to have you come into a residency. We have plenty of opportunities, whether it's at Wells Branch or another church or Parkway or wherever. We have plenty of churches looking for people that are looking to plant. In fact, we have an event coming up on October 19th.
Next Thursday.
In fact, if you go to plantaustin.com, go there, find out the information, come let us know you're coming. It's going to be, is that at Parkway?
Yes.
It's going to be at Parkway Church over in Pflugerville. And so don't miss this. If you're a person in maybe Central Texas or even beyond, you're I'm booking the plane and I'm coming. We would love to get connected with you, because we can connect you with a church that's going to plant you. This is one of the things you got to kind of wrap your head around. Maybe you're I don't know if I could plant next year. I'm not even saying next year. Get yourself conditioned at a place, or you could be a part of a church that plants churches, because the first place we look when it comes to plant churches from within, and then we're looking to recruit from without. So that's an important aspect. Anyway, we'll get more about that. We're going to bring Danny back. We're going to have the whole board's going to come up here eventually, as we're going to talk more about church planning to reach this city. So hey, thanks for watching. Have an awesome week of worship.